Blessed be the name of God. Our visitor this morning is John the Baptist. We've read from the first chapter of the Gospel of John, and there we have met this other John, the one who lives rough, the one who eats natural foods, the one mistaken for someone else, the one with clarity about his calling. Among you, he says, among you stands one whom you do not know, the one who is coming after me. I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal. This is John the Baptist, unworthy, but called by God. In truth, we met John last week in the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark, and by the gracious preaching of Tom Johnson, we were given the hope of John the Baptist, the one making preparations for the one who is coming, the expected and yet unexpected one. So we're spending a second Sunday with John the Baptist. The first contact in Mark's story last week, the second one by the telling of John the Evangelist. Last week, our preacher taught us about hope, aided by the prophet Isaiah and others. The preacher reminded us that hope arises when whatever is hoped for is absent, is missing. And though rooted in this yearning, hope also arises when whatever is hoped for is imaginable, possible, conceivable, out there somewhere, able to be expected. This week, John the Baptist has a different offering. The evangelist tells us, John came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. Last week, hope. This week, light. We are, at present, in the middle of December, our season of natural darkness. During the hours of any day this time of year, we have perhaps 9 hours of light and 15 hours of darkness. Amy and I have never lived anywhere that was as dark as where we live now in rural Langley. On clear nights, of course, we can see a rich array of stars in the heavens. But on cloudy nights, the more common variety of nights now, the stars are shrouded and the darkness is darkness, unmitigated. And if our natural lives are heavy on the side of darkness, our social, political, and medical lives are similarly shrouded. And beyond all that, our dear friend Kristen remains in a perilous coma. For my part, in the abundance of years that God has given me, I have never experienced a deeper, darker sense of darkness in myself or in the world that surrounds me than now. So clearly, and without question, my hopeful yearning is for what John the Baptist bears witness to, what John testifies to, that is the light. Light. Enough light to be able to see. And when the light shines, what do we see? In this light, what is revealed? Here the testimony of the prophet Isaiah comes into focus. The light reveals, you see, the promises of God. In the early verses of Isaiah 61, the prophet announces God's good intentions. The prophet declares that God has sent him, the prophet, to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the prisoners. To those who mourn will be given a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a faint spirit. It is so satisfying to hear again these promises, rich and full. Standing in the darkness, we rejoice to hear that abundant light is coming, and to anticipate and discover anew what that light will again reveal. So we rightly ask, what is our role in bringing these promises into fuller expression? As most of you know well, my dear Amy is a perpetual knitter, skillful, creative, reveling in vibrant colors. Several days ago, she was working her way through her current project. She got up from her chair in the living room and went into her studio, which is our second bedroom. When I asked her what she was up to, she said she needed better light. I asked her further. I have something to mend, she said. She needed light in order to mend her project. Light so as to mend. How grateful I was for what she said. Light enough to mend. That's what the promises of God require of us. The world around us is clearly in darkness, out of joint, in almost unimaginable disarray. It needs to be mended. And we have the light of the promises of God as they are manifest in Jesus to guide us. By this light, we can see that the hungry still need to be fed. Prisoners need visitation. The naked need clothing. And the unsheltered need safety. And what of the sick? 3,000 people died yesterday. Hundreds of thousands have died and are dying from the virus, the plague of our time, and countless others are sick. The sorrow of the moment is that this sickness requires us to stay away from each other rather than to attend. That is, except for the health care workers who sacrifice in care to an unimaginable degree. How to tend all that? I'm not sure. Our Jewish friends have a term for what I'm trying to describe. Tikkun olam. Tikkun olam. Mending the world. The small, even menial things that we each might do, that we each can do to repair what is torn in the world. What Amy was doing with her knitting project, the mending business, was setting things right, repairing an oversight, fixing a problem. If there are things that we might set right, that we might mend, that's ours to do. This is what people of the light do. Now here I confess I have to struggle for words. You know that a person who carries the cross at church is called the crucifer. When we use incense, the person who carries the thurible, that is the incense pot, the person who carries the thurible is called a thurifer. You know that the underground carrier of water in the earth is called an aquifer. And you know that Christopher means Christ bearer. Now, the comparable construction for light bearer would be Lucifer. And we have to admit that that word has already been taken. It just would not serve to call ourselves as light bearers Lucifers. So, instead of that kind of designation, I want to give you a picture, an image. I want you to recall and to see in your imagination Suzanne Ostertag lighting the Advent candles. I want you to see and recall in your imagination Mary Green or Kristen Herman singing the Exultet beside the Paschal candle at Easter Eve. I want you to see Allison Geibig or Roland or Maggie Garrett carrying a lighted processional torch at St. Stephen's on a longed-for Sunday morning. I want to give you these remembrances as touchstones for light in the current darkness. When I began, I confessed that I was mindful of the present darkness, mindful of the darkness in the rhythm of nature and in the social, political, and medical world that surrounds us, and in myself as well. Now I have to confess that being reminded of my obligation to bear the light that John proclaims, the light by which to be about the mending, the light that is abundantly pictured in our life at St. Stephen's, I have to confess that all this has been Advent nourishment for me, light. And I pray the same for you, each of you and all of you. Blessed be the name of God.